Have you ever seen a room go completely silent, not because of awe, but because of discomfort? It happened on a warm spring afternoon at a military award ceremony meant to honor the brave. Families were gathered. Cameras were ready. The stage was set for gratitude and pride. Then he stepped forward, a black soldier, uniform crisp metal shining in the sun. He walked with quiet dignity, calm, collected, carrying not just his service, but a silent history on his shoulders. He extended his hand to the officer in front of him. And right there, the air changed. The officer paused, looked at the hand, looked away, and without a word turned his back. No handshake, no nod, no eye contact, just silence. The soldier slowly lowered his hand, as if he just remembered something. Too many black men in uniform have had to learn. Bravery doesn't always earn respect. But then something no one expected happened. A single person in the audience stood up, then another and another, until the whole crowd was on their feet, not shouting, not clapping out of obligation, but rising for him. What made them rise? Why does a single act of rejection carry centuries of weight, and what does it take to make dignity louder than prejudice? In today's story, we go far beyond that single moment on stage. Because this isn't just about a handshake. It's about a wound that never quite healed and a crowd that for once chose not to look away. Stay with me. You're about to hear a story that might just shift the way you see silence, courage, and justice. There are moments in life that don't need words to speak volumes. They don't come with explosions or speeches. They come quietly like a pin dropping in a crowded room, and yet they shatter something deep inside us. This moment began with applause, the kind of polite rehearsed clapping that fills auditoriums during formal ceremonies. There were flags on display, polished shoes tapping in rhythm, and a sense of solemn pride in the air. Then they called his name, Sergeant Marcus Bell. He stood up slowly, straightened his uniform, and walked toward the stage with the kind of steady grace that only comes from years of discipline and service. No theatrics, no need to prove anything. Just a man walking in his truth. As he reached the front, he turned toward the row of dignitaries, officers in dress blues, community leaders, veterans. He offered his hand as tradition demanded, not with arrogance, but with the calm expectation of mutual respect. But the man in front of him, a senior official, didn't move. He looked at Marcus, then at the outstretched hand, and in front of hundreds of eyes and a dozen cameras, he turned and moved on to the next soldier. The clapping didn't stop, not immediately. It just softened. Like the room had suddenly realized something was wrong, but no one wanted to be the first to name it. Marcus didn't flinch. He stood still, hand dropping slowly, his face unreadable, but not empty. Because behind that calm was 1,000 silent echoes of other rooms, other rejections, other times he'd been made invisible despite his service. In that moment, it wasn't just a man being denied a handshake. It was a reminder that even in places built to honor, some are still asked to prove they belong. And yet it's what happened next that changed everything. Let me take you back, because to truly understand why the crowd rose, you have to understand who Marcus Bell really was. Not just a soldier, but a symbol of something far bigger. Marcus Bell wasn't famous. He didn't have medals pinned across his chest like armor. He wasn't the kind of man who sought recognition. In fact, most people in the room probably hadn't heard his name before that day. But those who knew him, really knew him, would tell you he was the kind of soldier every unit hopes for. Marcus grew up in a small town in Georgia, raised by his grandfather, a Vietnam veteran, who taught him that dignity wasn't something you demanded. It was something you lived even when no one was watching. At 17, Marcus enlisted in the Army, not because he dreamed of glory, but because he believed in service, in purpose, in doing what was right even when it was hard. He wasn't the loudest. He wasn't the fastest. But when things went wrong, when fear took over, it was Marcus who moved first. In Afghanistan, during his second deployment, a roadside bomb flipped their convoy. Amid the smoke and chaos, while others scrambled for cover, Marcus ran back, dragging 2 injured comrades to safety with a fractured shoulder and shrapnel in his leg. He didn't speak of it after. His commanding officer had to file the report. But that wasn't the story that stuck with people the most. The one they remembered happened back home. A junior soldier had broken down during a training exercise panic attack, shaking frozen in place. Others rolled their eyes, but Marcus sat down beside him, didn't speak for a long time, just stayed there shoulder to shoulder until the young man could breathe again. Later, that soldier said he didn't treat me like I was weak. He treated me like I mattered. That was Marcus Bell, not a headline hero, but a quiet constant. The kind of man who didn't just wear the uniform, he honored it in the way he showed up for people even when no one was clapping. And yet on that stage, no one seemed to see that. No stories were told, no introduction was given. Just his name called out, then forgotten. But the crowd didn't know the full picture yet. And sometimes when people finally do something, shifts. So let me show you what happened next. When the silence in that room began to speak louder than any microphone ever could. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Ceremonies like this are built on precision, on practiced timing, respectful gestures, and shared pride. Everything is rehearsed. Everything is structured. The applause starts and stops on cue. The photos are taken at just the right angles. The line of dignitaries is meant to be a symbol handshake by handshake. It tells every soldier you matter. But for Marcus Bell, that message was broken right there under the stage lights. He approached as every soldier before him had, stood tall, looked each official in the eye. But when he extended his hand to the second man in line, an older officer with decades of medals across his chest, something shifted. The officer glanced down, then looked away. A subtle step back, a pivot, a cold nod in the direction of the next soldier. And just like that, the line moved on without him. It happened quickly, quietly, without fuss. No words exchanged, no confrontation, just omission. And yet it landed heavier than any spoken insult could have. Some people watching didn't even notice at first, but others did. You could see it in their furrowed brows, the way they leaned slightly forward, unsure of what they'd just seen. Because in moments like this, it's not about what's said, it's about what's withheld. That's the thing about dignity, it's fragile in public spaces. And when a gesture like a handshake is denied, especially in uniform, it's not just a missed greeting, it's a signal. Some say it was just one man. Maybe he was distracted. Maybe it meant nothing. But history has taught us that sometimes silence shouts. And in that moment, what it shouted was this: "You don't belong here." Marcus didn't react. He didn't flinch. But the message had been sent. And it wasn't the first time something like this had happened, not to him, not to others like him. Because even in the most formal spaces, even in 2025, there are rooms where a black soldier can serve, can sacrifice, and still be seen as an outsider. It begs a larger question: why does this still happen? To answer that, we have to look further back into the untold history of black soldiers in America. Because what happened to Marcus didn't start on that stage. It started generations ago. And to understand the weight of that moment, we have to understand the weight of the uniform he wore. To understand why that handshake mattered so much, why its absence hurt more than most people could see, we have to travel back. Not just a few years, but generations. Because the story of black soldiers in America is one of bravery, yes, but also a burden. From the very beginning, black men have fought in wars for a country that didn't always fight for them. In the Revolutionary War, they were promised freedom in exchange for service, then often denied it. In the Civil War, the United States colored troops made up nearly 10% of the Union Army, yet many were paid less given the most dangerous assignments and buried without honors. And in World War II, men like the Tuskegee Airmen soared above the clouds defending a nation that still segregated their buses and bathrooms. You might have heard of Sergeant Henry Johnson. In 1918, during World War I, he fought off a German raid with just a knife and a jammed rifle, saving his fellow soldier's life. He was hailed as a hero in France, but back home in America, he was denied a Purple Heart, denied a pension. He died in poverty. It took nearly a century until 2015 for him to receive the Medal of Honor. And yet, even now, that legacy continues, quietly, persistently. In recent years, black veterans have spoken out about subtle discrimination within the ranks, being passed over for promotion, having their qualifications questioned, or facing isolation in command structures still slow to change. One former Marine said, "I fought for a flag that sometimes forgot my name." But here's the truth: despite every closed door, every insult swallowed, black soldiers have continued to stand up, not just for themselves, but for an ideal greater than the treatment they received. It's one of the most remarkable forms of patriotism, loving a country enough to protect it, even when it doesn't always protect you. That's the uniform Marcus Bell wore. That's the history stitched into every thread. And that's what made that cold shoulder not just a disrespectful moment, but a reminder of all the ones before it. But something was about to change, because sometimes the weight of the past becomes too heavy to ignore. And when the silence stretched too long, one person decided to break it. At first, the silence just hung there. After the officer turned away, the ceremony continued. The line of soldiers moved forward. Names were still called. Applause still followed. But something had shifted. You could feel it, not loud, not chaotic, just uneasy. People shifted in their seats. A few looked down, unsure whether they'd seen what they thought they saw. A mother in the second row stopped clapping. A boy in ROTC uniform whispered to his dad, "Why didn't they shake his hand?" The question lingered, and then quietly, without prompting, a woman in the third row stood up, alone. No speech, no signs, just a simple act. She stood, her hands at her sides, face steady. She didn't know Marcus. She wasn't part of any movement, but she knew what she saw, and she knew it wasn't right. A second later, a man beside her followed, then another 2 rows over. A veteran with a cane leaned on his wife's arm, stood too. Within moments, the entire crowd, row by row, rose to their feet. No music played. No one told them to rise. But they did. Not because Marcus had asked for it, not because someone shouted "stand up," but because sometimes silence becomes its own injustice, and the only answer is presence. What those people did in that moment wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rehearsed, but it meant something. It meant we saw what happened, and we won't pretend it didn't. And here's the thing, most change doesn't start with speeches or slogans. It starts with one person choosing not to look away. That day, those people reminded us you don't need a podium to take a stand. Sometimes just standing is enough. And that ripple, it didn't stop there. Because behind that rising crowd was a deeper question echoing in the room, one that would soon land in every living room, every classroom, every conversation that followed. How do we truly honor someone if we let prejudice speak louder than gratitude? To answer that, we have to look at a deeper conflict, one that many Americans still wrestle with when patriotism collides with unspoken bias, and what that means for those who wear the uniform. There's a quiet tension that lives in many American hearts, a line not drawn on any map but felt in moments like the one Marcus Bell lived through. A line between what we say we honor and who we actually include in that honor. It's easy to cheer for a soldier on the 4th of July. Easy to wave flags and wear red, white, and blue. But what happens when the face of that soldier doesn't match the image we've quietly built in our minds? That's where the invisible line appears. Marcus was a decorated soldier. He'd done everything his country asked of him. Fought bravely, led quietly, served with distinction. But the moment he stepped on that stage, the uniform wasn't the first thing some people saw. They saw a black man. And in the split second it took to withhold a handshake, that truth came to the surface. It's not always loud or obvious. Sometimes prejudice doesn't yell, it shrinks. It withdraws. It avoids eye contact and skips the outstretched hand. But it speaks all the same. This isn't new. We've seen it time and time again. Remember the story of Johnny Jones Sr., a black WU veteran who survived D-Day and returned home to Louisiana only to be beaten by police for sitting at the front of a bus in uniform. Or the countless black veterans who've come home and been denied housing loans, job opportunities, or even basic respect despite wearing the same uniform as their white brothers in arms. These aren't just footnotes in history books. They're reminders that for many, patriotism is a two-way mirror, clear on one side, clouded on the other. But here's the lesson. True patriotism isn't about who claps the loudest. It's about who honors the promise of equality when it's hardest. It's about recognizing that love for country should never require someone to shrink who they are to fit in. Marcus Bell shouldn't have had to choose between his identity and his uniform. He shouldn't have been made to feel that being both black and a soldier was somehow a contradiction. And yet that contradiction still exists for many. So we have to ask ourselves, not just as spectators, but as citizens. When we say we support the troops, Do we mean all of them? That question isn't just rhetorical, it's personal. Because what we accept or stay silent about says just as much about who we are as a nation as the flag we fly. And that leads us to a deeper reflection. Because this moment wasn't just about Marcus. It became a mirror held up to everyone in that room and to each of us. So now I'll ask you, what would you have done? If you were in that crowd, it's easy to watch from afar and say, I would have stood up. It's comforting to believe that in the face of injustice, we'd be brave, we'd be bold, we'd be loud. But the truth is, it's not always that simple. Most people in that room didn't stand up not right away. Not because they were cruel, not because they agreed with the officer's coldness, but because they were caught in something more subtle, more familiar hesitation. You see, silence isn't always agreement. Sometimes it's uncertainty. Sometimes it's fear of being the first. Sometimes it's the quiet voice inside that says, don't make a scene. It's not your place. There's a psychological term for it, the bystander effect. The more people are present, the less likely any one person is to act because we assume someone else will. It's the reason a crowd can witness something wrong and stay frozen. Not heartless, just human. But history doesn't remember the ones who looked away. It remembers the first one who stood. Think of Rosa Parks, not the first to resist, but the first whose silence shouted loud enough. Think of Brandon Brown, a high school student who refused to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance until racial justice was addressed in his school and faced suspension for it. Think of the single woman in that audience who rose for Marcus Bell, starting a wave without ever saying a word. The question isn't just, what would you have done? It's what will you do next time? Because there will be a next time. Maybe not on a stage, maybe not in uniform, but in a hallway, a classroom, a conversation, a vote. And in that moment, you'll have a choice: stay silent or shift the silence. Because sometimes the most powerful protest isn't loud. It's simply refusing to sit still. And that quiet courage, it spreads. In the next part of this story, we'll explore how a single act, one person's small stand, can ripple far beyond what we imagine. Because Marcus's story didn't end on that stage. In many ways, it had just begun. It's tempting to think change only happens through big movements, national speeches, or laws passed in government buildings. But more often than not, it begins with one person, one voice that refuses to stay quiet. That's what happened in that auditorium. The woman who first stood up for Marcus Bell didn't hold a sign. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't know if anyone would follow. But she stood. And in doing so, she reminded everyone else, you're not alone if you act. History is full of moments like that. Like Darnella Frazier, a teenager who, on her walk to the store, saw something that didn't sit right. She could have kept walking. She could have looked away. But instead, she held up her phone and filmed the murder of George Floyd. That 10-minute video became a turning point not just in Minneapolis, but around the world. Or take Ruby Bridges, just 6 years old when she walked into an all-white school in 1960. Alone, surrounded by protesters, too young to understand the politics, but brave enough to cross the line that history had drawn. Even in everyday life, this quiet power shows up. A teacher who defends a child being bullied. A coworker who speaks up when a joke goes too far. A neighbor who stops and listens when someone says, I don't feel safe. These aren't grand gestures, but they're real. And they matter because they remind others that courage is contagious. One voice can shift a room. One choice can shift a culture. That's the legacy Marcus Bell didn't ask for, but now carries. Not because he demanded attention, but because someone else saw his dignity and chose not to let it be dismissed. And here's the quiet truth behind all these stories. Change doesn't need a million people to start. It just needs one person to go first. So what does it look like when more of us start choosing to go first? When more of us recognize the moments to stand, speak, and see each other clearly? That's where we're headed next. Because while many of these stories spark hope, the reality is this kind of exclusion still happens. And in some ways, it hurts more than ever. You might wonder, after all the marches, all the awareness, all the headlines, how could something like this still happen? A black soldier in uniform being publicly dismissed in broad daylight. The answer isn't always loud. It hides in the quiet places, in unconscious habits, in assumptions we never question, in systems that were never built for everyone to belong. This kind of exclusion doesn't always come with slurs or laws anymore. It comes in subtler forms: the promotion that never arrives, the invitation that never gets sent, the handshake that never comes. Sociologists call it implicit bias, the unconscious judgments we make about others based on years of conditioning media and culture. It's when someone doesn't think they're racist, but still flinches, still hesitates, still makes someone else feel less than without even realizing it. That's what makes it so painful. Because when injustice is silent, it's harder to name. And when you do speak up, people say you're overreacting. Or worse, are you sure that really happened? That kind of gaslighting wears a person down. And when it happens to someone who's already carried the weight of service, the wound goes even deeper. Because to wear a uniform to risk your life for your country is the ultimate gesture of trust. And when that trust is broken by a simple turned shoulder, it doesn't just hurt the soldier. It questions the whole promise of what the uniform is supposed to represent. In Marcus Bell's case, the hurt wasn't just personal. It echoed through everyone who's ever felt unseen after giving their all. It reminded Black veterans across the country that no matter how much they sacrifice, they may still have to fight for basic respect. And in this era where so many believe we've moved on from racism, these moments sting even more. Because they're proof that beneath the surface, old patterns still linger. But here's the lesson. Pain like this can either harden us or open our eyes. It can close hearts or crack them wide enough to let light in. Marcus's story isn't just a cautionary tale. It's a call, a quiet invitation to see better, do better, and be better. Because behind every ignored hand is a human being, and behind every silent crowd is a chance to rise. Now let's come back to where we began. That stage, that soldier, that moment. Because while the officer walked away, something far more powerful happened. Something we must never forget. It's easy to focus on the moment the officer turned away, the missed handshake, the stillness, the silence. But if we stop there, we miss the heart of the story. Because this wasn't just about one gesture. It was about everything that gesture represents. A handshake in that setting isn't just politeness, it's affirmation. It says, I see you, I honor you, I recognize your worth. So when it's denied, especially to someone who's given everything in service, it does more than hurt feelings. It questions dignity. It erases presence. It says without words, you are not fully welcome here. And for someone like Marcus Bell, a man who never asked for praise, who carried both the weight of his uniform and the weight of his skin, that moment spoke louder than medals ever could. But here's the deeper truth. This wasn't a story about victimhood. It was a story about dignity that refused to bend. Marcus didn't shout. He didn't retaliate. He stood shoulders back, eyes forward, carrying a silence that held more power than any speech. And that's what the crowd saw. That's why they stood. Not just for what was done to him, but for how he responded with strength, with grace, with quiet, unwavering self-respect. Because dignity isn't something others give you. It's something you carry even when others try to take it away. And if you've ever been in a room where you felt unseen, if you've ever done the right thing and still been met with doubt or disregard, then you understand why this story matters. So let me ask you, what would you do if your worth was questioned in front of everyone? Would you shrink or would you stand taller? That's the lesson Marcus left us with. Not to respond with anger, but with unshakable presence. Not to demand respect, but to embody it so fully that others are reminded of what they forgot. And maybe that's what this story was really about. A single man, a quiet room, a rising crowd, not because he needed saving, but because sometimes dignity speaks louder than anything else. And when it does, the world has no choice but to listen. So if this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it, talk about it, pass it on. Because stories like these don't just deserve to be told. They deserve to be remembered. If this story made you feel something, don't let that feeling fade. Because Marcus Bell's moment wasn't just about him. It's about all of us. About the rooms we walk into, the people we choose to see, and the silence we choose to break. So here's what you can do. Stand up for someone who's been overlooked. Speak up when you witness subtle injustice. Share this story because the more we talk about dignity, the harder it is for the world to ignore it. Comment below. Have you ever felt invisible in a place you were supposed to belong? Your voice might be the one someone else needs to hear. And if you believe that quiet courage changes everything, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss a story that reminds us who we are and who we could become. Because sometimes one story can shift 1,000 hearts. And maybe, just maybe, that story starts with you.